Did you know the Mcintosh MC275 tube power amp was introduced 60 years ago? And for some, it is considered as one of the legendary amps. Now, it was discontinued in the 70s when everyone was transitioning to solid state, but was brought back in the 90s. Right now, the MC275 is at the 6th generation. I guess that's why they call it MK6. I have the MK4, and the reason why I bought it is because I was curious about, what the hype is about. The Mcintosh MC275 was not cheap when it first came out. It was about at least 2 to 3 months of salary for a normal person. And that was before the invention of instant noodles. So you can't just move in with your parents, eat instant noodles for 2 months, and save up to buy an MC275. Today, it still costs a well-paid person about 2 to 3 months of salary to buy the MC275. Out of curiosity, I also bought the Mcintosh MC240, and that one did not disappoint me because it uses 6L6 tubes and the mid-range is musical enough that I can see why it was also considered as one of the legendary Mcintosh tube amp. Did you know that the MC240 was $288 in 1960? And I paid $3,000 Canadian for this one on the used market. Damn, no wonder they say Mcintosh keeps its value. Better than putting money in the bank. Now, when I first started my audio journey, just like many, I was curious about Mcintosh. Now, I remember reading comments about people saying, well, Mcintosh, only lawyers or doctors who have no idea about sound buy. They buy it for the prestige and not for the performance. Now, I always say, you never know until you actually try it. So, I bought a few Mcintosh amps and discovered I liked the Mcintosh sound. Now, over the years, I realized, okay, there's the older Mcintosh sound and then the newer Mcintosh sound. Older is more about color. And relatively speaking, the newer Mcintosh is more neutral and has all the characteristics of newer amps. Very transparent, great soundstage, great instrument separation, and blah, blah, blah. All the effects of new amplifiers. So when I got the MC275 MK4, I was wondering if it had the old or new sound. Would it blow me away given its legendary status? Well, unlike the MC240, I found it just okay. It is in between the old and new sound, more towards the newer Mcintosh sound. After all, it was introduced around 2004. Now, I can understand why it was considered as a wow amp at the time because it definitely had enough transparency, power, soundstage layering, and instrument separation that was probably ahead of its time. So, it's not your typical grandpa Mcintosh slow amp. So why did I find it just okay? Unlike the MC240, the MC275 uses KT88, so the strength is different. The MC240 is more about mid-range, while the MC275 is more about a bit of everything else. The problem is I recently have been testing a lot of modern tube amps that also uses KT88. And when I compared those to the 275 MK4, I can't really say the 275 MK4 is better. Just take soundstage for example. Probably all my other tube amps have a deeper soundstage than the MK4. Now, having said that, sure, I can still make a case for the MK4 as to why it is better. After all, it still has that thick, warm Mcintosh presentation. But I will say this, the MC275 MK4 was great for its time, but the world has changed, and so have our standards. Now, recently, my audio buddy, Mr. Kanta, bought the MK6. And I asked my subscribers if they would like to see a video comparing the MK4 and the MK6. Now, I was curious myself, but originally I had zero interest in trying the MK6 at my home because in my heart, yeah, the MK6 should be just a bit better than the MK4. And also, man, the thing is bloody 70 pounds. I'm too old for this. But I did a quick poll on my community page and I saw, oh, there was an interest. So my audio buddies, for you, and I really mean for you, I have picked up the MK6 and have done an A/B test against the MK4. Once again, like 70% of my videos, it is free work. So a big thank you to my Patreons for supporting me. And no, Mcintosh is not paying me. Heck, they don't even know I'm making this video. You guys, help me email Mcintosh and ask them to send me gear for review. Now, I do want to say thank you for voting yes on wanting me to try this MK6, because the moment I powered up, I was like, whoa, this, I can see why it's worth 6,000 USD. So today, let's talk about the Mcintosh MK6 and how it compares to the MK4. By the way, for those who have never seen the startup sequence of the MK6, it is so cool. The Mcintosh MC275 MK6 uses 4 KT88, 3 12AX7A, and 4 12AT7 tubes. Thank God the MK6 uses a 5-way binding post, because the original version had these screw terminals, or whatever you call them. My MK4 was actually modified to use a 5-way binding post too. Now, what really caught my attention with this amp is it outputs 75 watt with only 4 KT88. Now, as you know, I'm building an amp myself, which should be ready in about 4 or 5 months. And I tell you, to output 75 watt with 4 KT88 is very, very impressive. Think about it, the Prima Luna Evo 400 with 8 tubes only outputs 70 watt. The only question I have is, what about the life expectancy of the tubes? Logic would have it, if you're driving it hard, the life expectancy should be shorter. Now, if any amp designers know, please put it in the comment section. Besides this, I cannot think of any other negative with this amp. It is built like a tank, and I personally love that they preserved that unique MC275 look. So let me start by comparing to the MK4. What have years of improvement brought? In terms of detail and upper treble, I feel both MK4 and MK6 are about the same. Where the difference really starts is more in the mid-range. The MK6 mid is a bit rounder and polished. The bass hits harder on the MK6 and is better controlled in terms of speed and tightness. The center image is more solid with the MK6, with more air and longer decay. The 3D soundstage has better layering with the MK6, while the MK4 is wider, the soundstage, but less deep and less precise. Now, the MK4 feels more like a diffuse wall sound, while with the MK6, you can pinpoint everything precisely. Now, I don't want people thinking the MK4 does not have a solid soundstage. It does, but just not as good as the MK6. Next, the background is not as dark with the MK4, so instrument separation is not as clear. So, objectively speaking, the MK6 is a step up from the MK4, but there's always a but. I always say a question of taste. Now, the MK4 overall presentation is fatter, a bit warmer, while the MK6 is, relatively speaking, more neutral, more modern sounding. So if you're chasing after that more mellow and relaxed Mcintosh presentation, well, relatively speaking, the MK4 is probably a better choice. Now, the difference between both MK4 and MK6 is significant enough that I would not recommend you buy blind. If you have been enjoying your MK4 for years, you might not find the MK6 as warm, relatively speaking. Now, I keep emphasizing relatively speaking because even though I say the new MK6 is more neutral, its natural sound characteristic is still on the warmer side. So there's still color with this amp. Now, I don't want anyone to think the MK4 is that grandpa's slow veil power amp. It is not. The MK4 was sold between 2004 and 2007, so it does have a lot of modern amp characteristics. Now, so why do I like the MK6 a lot? I love the mid-range. There's a lot of clarity in the mids, and yet there's the right amount of softness and roundness at the right spot. It is as if somebody took a sandpaper and polished selective areas of the mids. So it is smooth where it should be and sharp where it should be. When I listen to vocal, it has that euphonic, smooth, and inviting presentation that melts my heart. Yet, instruments retain all their texture and detail. So it is both smooth and sharp at the same time. Maybe because of that dark background, the separation of instrument is world class. For a tube amp, that plucking of the guitar, you can hear the strings vibrating, you can feel the attack, and the air, the decay, the space around the instruments, very nice. Sometimes it feels like the amp adds just a bit more echo, so it creates that sense of air really well. As I mentioned, despite having a certain softness in the mids, the sharpness is also there, so the center image is rock solid. Positioning of everyone in the soundstage is precise. The bass is dynamic and rich. It has a strong upper bass and yet fast enough for a tube amp. Now, I know if you compare it to a good high-end solid-state amp, there's still a gap. But as I always say, when it is good enough to the point where it does not distract you from the music, that is all that matters. Sometimes I feel, some people are so obsessed with comparisons that they miss the big picture. Now, there is one problem with what I just described. It is possible you might not get this level of performance if you buy this amp, because the problem is my audio buddy Mr. Kanta changed all the front tubes to new old stock. And if you go buy those tubes, they're like $800 on the used market. Another realization I had is this. I know we all say Mcintosh is color, but as I mentioned, it's still relatively neutral enough that what you pair with it will have a big impact. I remember when I plugged my Exasound E28 DAC, my own reference DAC, to it directly, I did not enjoy it as much when compared to connecting it directly to the budget Soncoz DAC. You see, the Soncoz DAC is more neutral, so it's less fat, feels faster and more linear. Now with the Mcintosh D150 DAC, yeah, it is okay. It is smoother, but I don't have the same attack as the Soncoz DAC. Anyways, the 275 is still an amp more on the warmer side, so equipment matching is really important. So let's wrap it up at this point. Now, if I consider everything, including the price, is the Mcintosh 275 MK6 worth the price difference when compared to all these Asian amps I've been reviewing? If you objectively take a step back, all these amps from like Cayenne, Doge, Wilsonton, if I blind test people at an audio show, I would guess a lot of people probably will not understand what is the big deal with the MC275, especially now you can get such high performing amps from Asia. I know people will always bring up the law of diminishing return whenever we talk about expensive gear. After all, the differences, objectively speaking, it's not like that big. The subtle differences, is it worth it? That is a question only you can answer. From my point of view, it is worth it, and let's talk about it. Let's take listening to detail, for example. The Mcintosh MC275, I can hear all the micro details easily. But one can say big deal. I can hear all the details too with my well-measured $500 amp from Asia. However, for someone like me who has gone over 100 amps from different price bracket, I noticed there are many ways you can get details. For instance, you can get plenty of detail by tilting up the top end, or you can get detail by having a dark background and good separation, which in turn gives it an extra layer of clarity. That effortless detail makes the presentation more natural. So how do you put a value to that effortless detail? Another observation I have when I talk about higher end amp is the fluidity of the amp. It means I don't hear any hesitation in the presentation. Now, I don't know, is it because they use better transformers, but there's a certain smoothness to it that you can feel. No, it's not like budget amps are like jerking when it's playing music. Now, part of the reason I noticed this is because I switch between high-end and entry-level frequently. Now, if you're someone who listens to high-end all day, all the time, you might take this for granted. Now, an example I use frequently is, imagine you have a 4-cylinder car and an 8-cylinder car. Both cars can go up a hill with no problem at 60 km/h with the air conditioning on. However, anyone with experience with an 8-cylinder and a 4-cylinder car will know that the 8-cylinder car, despite driving at the same speed, will have a certain ease to it that the 4-cylinder will not have. Although both will get to the same finish line at the same speed, the experience is not the same. The MC275, when I compare it to some of the less expensive amps out there, there is that subtle differences that it feels just a bit more fluid. It's not something you can pick up easily at an audio show. And maybe that's why I'm rarely impressed by anything at an audio show. How many times have we seen comments like this? My $50 amp, at home sounds better than what I heard at the audio show. Sure, it might not sound impressive at an audio show, but at home, by doing enough A/B tests in a quiet environment, you might come to pick up these things that I've picked up over the years. So, how do you put a value to that? That is why I always say, if you can pick up all these subtle differences, you will understand that high-end gear has a place and should be celebrated for what it can do. Can I show it in the measurements? No. And not only that, I bet you can take a cheap amplifier from Asia and it will measure better than this MC275. Would it sound better? Not from my experience. So in short, the reason why I was really impressed with the MC275 MK6 is that it does a lot of things well, and with two things really standing out. I love how amazing the instrument separation was, that soundstage, that dark background, and how smooth the mid-range is at the right location. Now, don't buy it blind. You still have to worry about equipment matching because, as I said, there were some matching that I did not enjoy with the MC275, but when the matching is good, man, audio heaven. Alright guys, so I'll see you next time and happy holidays.